The marble floors of Oakwood Private Hospital gleamed under LED lights that cost more than most people's cars. Richard Sterling's Italian leather shoes clicked against them in rapid rhythm as he strode through the executive wing, not bothering to look at anyone who stepped aside for him. Behind him, a young woman in a plain gray blazer walked silently, tablet in hand. Elena Martinez, third week as an intern, nobody important. Unit 4B discharged yet? Sterling barked at a passing nurse without breaking stride. Mr. Chen is still... I asked if he's discharged, yes or no. The nurse hesitated. His oxygen levels aren't stable. Then stabilize them somewhere cheaper. Sterling turned a corner. Insurance ran out yesterday. Every hour he's here costs us money. Elena's fingers moved across her tablet screen, typing. Always typing. Dr. Marcus Hayes emerged from a patient room, clipboard clutched tight. His jaw was set. He'd been waiting for this moment all morning. Sterling. We need to talk. Now. Sterling stopped, smiled. The kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Dr. Hayes, you're looking stressed. Bad for your health. 6 patients. Hayes stepped directly into Sterling's path. 6 patients with the new cardiotech pacemakers. 3 died. 2 in critical condition. One's got irregular rhythms that shouldn't be possible with these devices. And you're telling me this because? Because you approved the contract. Because cardiotech's failure rate is documented at 12% when the industry standard is under 2. Because we have better options that cost $8 more per unit. Sterling's smile widened. He glanced at the nurses, the administrative staff, everyone watching. Dr. Hayes, let me explain something about how hospitals actually work. You treat symptoms. I treat balance sheets. You save one life at a time. I save this entire institution. Without me, there's no hospital. Without this hospital, you're just a guy with a medical degree and no place to use it. People are dying. People die every day. It's called statistics. Sterling straightened his tie. Cardiotech saves us $200,000 annually. That pays for 3 nurses. Would you like to choose which 3 we fire? Silence. Hayes's hands shook, but he said nothing. Sterling's gaze shifted, landed on Elena. She was still typing. You, intern, what's your name again? Elena looked up. Her expression was neutral, unreadable. Elena Martinez. Right, the diversity hire. He stepped closer. What exactly are you writing? Notes for the quarterly report. Notes about what? Operational efficiency metrics, patient turnover rates, compliance documentation. Sterling's eyes narrowed. Something about her tone. Too calm, too precise. Let me make something very clear to both of you. He looked between Hayes and Elena. This hospital runs because I make the hard decisions. If you can't handle that, there are 10,000 doctors and 10 million interns who'd kill for your positions. Do your jobs, stay in your lanes, or I'll find people who will. He turned and walked away. Behind him, Elena's fingers returned to her tablet. Still typing, still watching. Sterling smiled to himself as he reached his office door. These people thought they could challenge him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. No idea how many people he'd crushed on his way up. And they never would. Elena walked the hospital corridors like a ghost. People looked past her, through her, around her. The intern badge clipped to her blazer made her invisible. Perfect. She moved through the procurement department during lunch when half the staff was gone. Scanned supply labels. Cardiotech pacemakers, lot number 47,392. She cross-referenced the serial numbers against the patient database on her tablet. Match, match, match. Every critical incident, same lot number. In the records room, she pulled files that should have been digital, found discharge summaries with dates that didn't align with the admission logs. Patient complaints mysteriously absent from official charts. Incident reports filed, then modified, then buried. Someone was cleaning up evidence, doing it badly. A nurse passed by, offered a polite smile. "Can I help you find something?" "Just reviewing procedures for my report," Elena said. "Oh, well, good luck with that." The nurse's tone was kind but dismissive, the way you'd talk to someone doing busy work, someone who didn't matter. Elena nodded and kept moving. Fourth floor, understaffed by hospital standards. One nurse managing 12 patients when protocols called for 1 per 6. She watched the woman sprint between rooms, checking IVs, answering call buttons, documenting medications. Exhausted, running on fumes. Elena lingered near the nursing station, pretending to organize papers. Two nurses talked in low voices. He cut another position. "Which department?" "ICU. Said we're overstaffed compared to industry benchmarks." "We're already drowning. How does he expect?" "He doesn't care. You heard him in the meeting. Optimize labor costs. That's all we are. Costs. Mrs. Delgado in 407 needs another day at least. Her infection isn't cleared. Billing says her insurance maxed out. Sterling wants her discharged by tonight. She lives alone. She can barely walk." "I know." Silence. Heavy. Defeated. Elena's fingers moved across her tablet. Recording. Documenting. Building. She rode the elevator to the executive floor, watched Sterling through the glass wall of his office. He was on the phone, laughing. Feet up on his desk. Everything about his posture screamed power, control, untouchable. He glanced up, saw her standing there. His expression shifted. Annoyance, like she was a fly buzzing near his window. He waved her away. Elena didn't move immediately. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to make him uncomfortable, long enough to see the flicker of irritation cross his face. Then she turned and walked away. Back in the supply closet she'd converted into a makeshift workspace, Elena pulled up her files, cross-referenced procurement contracts with Medicare billing codes, found the pattern hidden in plain sight. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't negligence. This was systematic, deliberate, calculated. Sterling wasn't just cutting corners. He was orchestrating fraud, and people were dying because of it. She highlighted 6 transactions, flagged 12 patient cases, tagged evidence from 4 different departments. The pattern was clear now, and patterns could be proven. The emergency room doors burst open at 11:47 p.m. Paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. Male, mid-50s, clutching his chest. Gray skin, shallow breathing, classic MI presentation. "Acute myocardial infarction," the lead paramedic shouted. "BP dropping. He needs the cath lab now." Dr. Hayes was already moving, snapping orders. "Get him to OR 2. Page cardiology. Start heparin and—" Wait. A woman in a blazer appeared. Billing department, tablet in hand. "Insurance status?" "He's coding," Hayes said. "We don't have time." "Insurance. Status." The paramedic looked uncomfortable. "He said he doesn't have coverage. Lost his job 3 months ago." The billing coordinator's expression hardened. "Then we need authorization before—" "He's having a heart attack," Hayes snapped. "We're a hospital. We treat him." "Dr. Hayes." Richard Sterling's voice cut through the chaos. He'd appeared from nowhere, phone still in his hand. "Transfer him to County General." The ER went silent. Hayes stared. "What?" "You heard me. County handles uninsured cases. We don't have the capacity. We have 2 open ORs. We have staff. We have everything he needs right here." Sterling stepped closer, lowered his voice, but didn't bother hiding his words from the staff watching. "What we don't have is a way to get paid. County has a mandate. We don't. EMTALA says we have to stabilize. EMTALA says we stabilize and transfer. That's what we're doing." Sterling turned to the paramedics. "Load him back up. County's 15 minutes away." "He might not have 15 minutes, Hayes said. "Then he should have thought about that before showing up here without insurance." Elena had been standing near the nurse's station, invisible as always. Now she stepped forward. EMTALA requires stabilization before transfer, she said quietly. That includes emergency surgery if medically necessary. Transferring an unstable patient violates federal law. Every head turned. Sterling looked at her like she just materialized out of thin air. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. The intern knows healthcare law. How cute. He walked toward her. Let me explain something about the real world, sweetheart. The law is flexible if you know the right people. And I know senators. I know hospital board presidents. I know the people who decide what gets investigated and what gets ignored. He leaned in. Who do you know? Elena's expression didn't change. The law. Sterling's smile vanished. You're done here. Pack your things. Security will escort you out. You're violating. I'm protecting this hospital from liability. You're a 3-week intern who doesn't understand how anything works. He turned to the room. Anyone else want to play lawyer? No? Good. He gestured to the paramedics. Transfer him, now. The patient was loaded back onto the stretcher, wheeled out. Dr. Hayes stood frozen, furious, helpless. The ER staff looked away. Elena pulled out her phone, opened the voice recording app that had been running in her pocket since the patient arrived. Sterling noticed. What are you doing? Taking notes, Elena said, for compliance documentation. Their eyes locked. Sterling smiled again, cold, confident. You have 10 minutes to clear out your desk. Elena saved the recording, backed it up to 3 different servers. Then she looked at Sterling one more time. Noted, she said. Elena didn't leave. Sterling expected her gone by morning. Instead, she showed up at 7 a.m. Same gray blazer, same neutral expression. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, just returned to her makeshift workspace and continued typing. He saw her in the hallway that afternoon, ignored her. She didn't exist to him anymore. Perfect. Days passed, then a week. Sterling stopped looking over his shoulder, stopped wondering why she was still there. In his mind, she'd been handled, humiliated, neutered. Just another idealistic kid who learned how the world really worked. He grew bolder. Monday morning, executive meeting. Sterling on speakerphone with a medical device supplier. The contract says net 30 payment terms, the supplier said, but we'd be willing to extend that to net 60 if you increase the order volume. And the consulting fee we discussed? A pause. 5% of total contract value, deposited quarterly to the account you specified. Make it 7 and you've got a deal. Elena sat outside the conference room, door cracked open 6 inches, her phone propped against a stack of binders, recording. Tuesday afternoon, Sterling in his office, door open, volume loud. I don't care what the readmission rates are, he told someone on the phone. If they come back within 30 days, that's their problem, not ours. Discharge them. Let county deal with the fallout. Elena walked past carrying coffee, stumbled slightly. Her phone slipped from her pocket, slid under the door gap into his office. Damn it, she muttered, kneeling to retrieve it. Took her 15 seconds, recording the whole time. Sterling didn't even look up. Wednesday morning, staff email from Sterling's office. Subject, Q3 Cost Optimization Initiatives. Elena read it twice, forwarded it to a dummy account, highlighted 3 sections that directly contradicted Medicare billing regulations. Thursday, Sterling held court in the cafeteria during lunch. 5 department heads circled around him, laughing at his jokes. The secret to running a hospital, he said loud enough for nearby tables to hear, is remembering that patients are customers, and customers who can't pay aren't customers. They're liabilities. One administrator looked uncomfortable. What about our community service mandate? Mandates are suggestions with good PR. Sterling grinned. Do the minimum. Document everything. Nobody actually checks. Elena sat 3 tables away, eating a salad, earbuds in, but the music wasn't playing. Her phone lay face down on the table, voice memo app running. Friday afternoon. Sterling walked past Elena's workspace. She was organizing files. He paused, seemed about to say something, then shook his head and kept walking. She wasn't worth the breath. That night, Elena compiled the week's evidence. 7 recordings, 14 emails, 6 documented policy violations, 3 potential federal charges. She cross-referenced everything against Title 42 U.S.C., the False Claims Act, and the anti-kickback statute. Then she made 4 backup copies, encrypted each one differently, sent them to 4 different secure servers. Sterling thought she was beaten, thought silence meant surrender. He didn't understand that patience wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And the case she was building didn't need to be loud, it just needed to be airtight. Dr. Hayes found Elena in the hospital chapel at 2 a.m. She was the only person there. Sitting in the last pew, tablet glowing in the darkness. He hesitated in the doorway. "I didn't think anyone else would be here." Elena looked up. "Long shift. You're not even a medical student. Why are you still here?" "Could ask you the same thing." Hayes sat down 3 rows ahead, didn't look at her, just stared at the simple wooden cross on the wall. "I've been a doctor for 19 years, he said quietly. "Saved a lot of lives, lost some too. You never get used to that part." He paused. "But this is different. This isn't about medicine failing. It's about something else." Elena set down her tablet, waited. "Dr. Patel, cardiothoracic surgeon, best I've ever seen. She questioned a device contract 2 years ago, said the equipment was substandard. Sterling had her gone within a month, claimed she made critical errors in surgery, destroyed her reputation. She's working at a clinic in Ohio now." "Were the errors real?" "No," Hayes' jaw tightened. "The review board found nothing, but by then it didn't matter. Hospitals don't hire surgeons with investigations on their record, true or not." "What about Dr. Morrison, neurology?" Hayes turned. "How do you know about Morrison?" "I read the staff directory, noticed his name disappeared last year. He tried to report Medicare fraud. Sterling found out before he could file. Suddenly, Morrison's pain medication prescriptions were flagged for review. DEA got an anonymous tip. Nothing came of it, but Morrison lost his license for 6 months during the investigation. His career never recovered." Elena's expression didn't change. "And you're afraid the same thing will happen to you?" It wasn't a question. Hayes looked back at the cross. "I have a daughter in college, a mortgage, student loans I'll be paying until I'm 70. I can't afford to lose everything because I tried to do the right thing. But people are dying." "I know," his voice cracked. "God, I know. That patient we turned away last week? I called county. He died in their ER before they could get him to surgery. 47 years old, 2 kids. Hayes put his head in his hands. "I took an oath. First, do no harm. And I'm doing harm every day I stay silent." Elena leaned forward slightly. "Has Sterling ever offered you anything? Money? Benefits?" Hayes went very still. "Why would you ask that?" "Just trying to understand how this works." Silence stretched between them. "There are bonuses," Hayes said finally. "Performance bonuses, tied to efficiency metrics, cost savings, patient turnover rates." He laughed bitterly. "They don't call it what it is, but we all know. Keep the numbers good, keep Sterling happy, and the checks get bigger. And if you don't, then you're Dr. Patel or Dr. Morrison." Elena picked up her tablet again. "What if there was a way to stop him, without putting your license at risk?" Hayes looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. "Who are you?" Elena met his eyes. "Someone who takes notes." Elena spent 3 hours in the procurement archive room, dust-covered filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in months. Everything was supposed to be digital now, but paper trails had a way of telling stories that deleted emails couldn't. She found the cardiotech contract buried in a drawer marked Q2 2023 Archived. The official purchase order, $847 per pacemaker unit. Market rate was $695. Oakwood was overpaying by $152 per device. She pulled contracts from other suppliers. Same pattern. Every single one inflated by 15 to 20% above market value. Someone was getting that difference. She cross-referenced the contracts with Sterling's financial disclosure forms. Nothing. Too smart for that. Then she found the consulting agreements. Cardiotech paid Sterling Healthcare Consulting LLC $50,000 quarterly for market analysis and strategic advisory services. MedSupply Corp paid the same company $35,000 for operational efficiency consulting. 6 different companies, all paying Sterling's Shell Corporation, all receiving contracts with Oakwood Hospital. Elena photographed every page. The anti-kickback statute was clear. Anyone who knowingly solicits or receives payment in exchange for referrals or purchases involving federal healthcare programs faced criminal prosecution. Medicare and Medicaid were federal programs. Sterling wasn't just being unethical, he was committing felonies. She heard voices in the hallway, footsteps approaching. Elena slid the files back, moved to a different cabinet, pretended to search for something else. Sterling walked past with a man in an expensive suit, supplier rep. They headed toward the executive conference room. Elena waited 30 seconds, followed. The conference room had glass walls, but the blinds were closed. She couldn't see inside, but the ventilation duct ran through the wall behind a supply closet next door. She slipped into the closet, pressed her phone against the vent. Sterling's voice came through, muffled but clear. "The board's asking questions about cost increases," he said. "I need you to provide documentation that these prices are industry standard." "We can fabricate comparative pricing analyses," the supplier said. "Make it look like everyone's paying similar rates." "How long?" 2 weeks, but this kind of cover costs extra." "How much extra?" 10% increase on the consulting fee. "And I need assurance that our contract renewal is guaranteed for another 3 years. Sterling laughed. "You'll get your renewal. Just make sure those documents are bulletproof. The last thing I need is some auditor finding discrepancies." "What about the intern, the one who was asking questions?" "Handled. She's harmless. Doesn't have the authority or the knowledge to do anything, even if she wanted to." "You're sure?" "Trust me. I've been doing this for 8 years. Nobody's ever gotten close." Elena's hand tightened around her phone. 8 years. She ran the math in her head. Estimated 200 devices per year. $152 overpayment per device. Plus kickbacks. Plus fraudulent billing. Millions of dollars. Sterling wasn't just corrupt. He was organized crime in a suit. The meeting ended. She heard chairs moving, goodbyes being exchanged. Elena stayed in the closet until their footsteps faded. Then she uploaded the recording to her encrypted server, labeled it Evidence File 7, Federal Conspiracy. The case had crossed a line. This wasn't about hospital policy anymore. This was about prison time. Sterling found Elena in the procurement office on Tuesday morning. She was reviewing vendor invoices, had 3 monitors open, spreadsheets covered in highlighted cells. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp. Elena didn't flinch. "Cross-referencing supply costs against budget allocations for the quarterly report." "Who told you to do that?" "Nobody. I thought it would be helpful." Sterling stepped closer, looked at her screens. His jaw tightened. "Those files are restricted. They're in the shared procurement folder, no password protection. That doesn't mean you have clearance to access them." Elena saved her work, closed the spreadsheets calmly. "Should I not have looked at them?" "You should stop being so curious about things that don't concern you." He crossed his arms. "You're an intern. Your job is to observe, not investigate." "I'm just trying to learn how the system works." "The system works because people stay in their lanes." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "I've been watching you. You're always taking notes, always asking questions, always showing up in places you don't belong. I didn't realize there were places I wasn't allowed. Don't play dumb, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Elena met his gaze, said nothing. Sterling leaned against the desk. Let me be very clear. Your internship ends in 3 weeks. Whether you get a recommendation letter depends entirely on how cooperative you are between now and then. Do you understand? Yes. Good. He straightened. From now on, you'll be working exclusively with HR, filing paperwork, updating employee records, nothing else. No more wandering around the hospital, no more sitting in on meetings, no more access to operational files. Understood. And Elena? He smiled, cold, controlled. If I find out you've been sharing information with anyone, staff, patients, outside parties, I'll make sure you never work in healthcare again. Not as a doctor, not as a nurse, not even as a janitor. I have connections everywhere. One phone call, and you're done. Elena's expression remained perfectly neutral. Is there anything else? Sterling studied her face, looking for fear, anger, any reaction at all. He found nothing. It unsettled him, just slightly. Get to HR, they're expecting you. Elena gathered her tablet and left. Sterling watched her go. Something about her bothered him. The way she never argued, never defended herself, just absorbed everything and moved on. But she was just an intern. No power, no connections, no resources. What could she possibly do? He shook off the feeling and returned to his office. Elena walked to HR, smiled politely at the coordinator, spent 4 hours filing insurance forms and updating contact information. Meaningless work. Exactly what Sterling wanted. At lunch, she sat alone in her car, opened her laptop, accessed her encrypted files through a VPN. She had everything she needed. 8 years of fraud, documented kickbacks, recorded confessions, federal violations on 17 separate counts. The case was complete. Now she just needed the right moment. Sterling thought he'd neutralized her, thought he'd put her back in her place. He didn't understand that she'd never left it, because her place wasn't below him. It was above the entire system he'd corrupted. The quarterly board meeting started at 9 a.m. sharp. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table. Hospital administrators lined the walls. Richard Sterling stood at the head of the room, remote control in hand, presentation glowing on the screen behind him. Q3 results exceed all projections, he announced. Revenue up 23%, operating costs down 18%, profit margins at a 5-year high. Applause filled the room. Sterling clicked to the next slide, bar graphs, all trending upward. We've optimized every department, reduced waste, streamlined operations. Oakwood Private Hospital is now the most profitable facility in the region. More applause. Board members nodded approvingly. Elena stood near the back wall. Intern assignment, refresh water glasses. She moved quietly between chairs, pitcher in hand, filling glasses that didn't need filling. Invisible. Sterling continued. Our device procurement strategy has generated significant savings. New supplier relationships have proven highly beneficial. I've attached the detailed breakdown in your packets. One board member raised his hand. Richard, there have been some questions about readmission rates. Are we concerned about quality metrics? Readmissions are within acceptable parameters, Sterling said smoothly. Any increase is attributable to patient non-compliance, not our care standards. Nods around the table. Elena refilled a glass near Sterling, her hand steady, expression blank. He glanced at her, dismissed her immediately, continued talking. Looking ahead to Q4, I'm proposing additional cost optimization measures, staff reductions in non-essential departments, further refinement of our patient acceptance criteria, and expansion of our high-margin elective procedures. Brilliant strategy, someone said. This is why you're the best in the business, another added. Sterling smiled. soaked in the praise. Then he paused, looked directly at Elena. "Before we continue," he said, voice shifting, "I need to address a personnel matter." He set down the remote. "This young woman has been interning with us for the past month. Unfortunately, it's become clear that she lacks the professionalism and discretion required in a healthcare environment." Elena stopped pouring, looked up. Every eye in the room turned to her. "She's been accessing confidential files without authorization, asking inappropriate questions, creating disruption among staff." Sterling's tone was measured, reasonable. "I've tried to mentor her, give her guidance, but some people simply aren't suited for this industry." Elena said nothing. "Effective immediately, your internship is terminated." He gestured toward the door. "Please collect your belongings and leave the building. Security will escort you out." Silence. Elena set down the water pitcher, carefully, precisely. The board members looked uncomfortable. A few stared at their papers. This was awkward, embarrassing. But Sterling was the CEO. His call. Elena reached into her blazer pocket, pulled out her badge, but she didn't unclip it. She just stood there, holding it, looking at Sterling. "Is there something you'd like to say?" Sterling asked, challenging her, daring her to make a scene. Elena's expression finally changed. Not anger, not fear, something else entirely. "Yes," she said quietly, "there is." The room held its breath. Elena didn't move toward the door. She walked toward the head of the table. Sterling's smile faltered. "Excuse me, I said you're dismissed." "My name is Elena Martinez." Her voice was different now, clear, authoritative. "I'm a special agent with the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General." The room went dead silent. Sterling's face drained of color. Elena pulled out her real badge. Federal credentials. Gold shield. "For the past 4 weeks, I've been conducting an undercover investigation into Medicare fraud, kickback schemes, and violations of the anti-kickback statute at this facility." A board member stood up. "This is ridiculous. Richard, what is she?" "Sit down," Elena said, not loud, but absolute. The board member sat. Elena set her badge on the table, opened her tablet. "Mr. Sterling has been accepting illegal kickbacks from medical device suppliers in exchange for contract awards. He has systematically defrauded Medicare and Medicaid through upcoding, unnecessary procedures, and falsified billing documentation. He has violated EMTALA by refusing emergency treatment to patients based on insurance status." "That's absurd," Sterling said, but his voice cracked. "She's lying. She's a disgruntled intern trying to—" "I have 8 years of financial records, 17 hours of recorded conversations, email correspondence with 6 different suppliers, shell company documentation, and testimony from 4 staff members who've agreed to cooperate." Sterling's hands gripped the edge of the table. The board members looked at each other. Confusion. Panic. "This meeting is over," Sterling said. "Everyone out, now." "Nobody moves," Elena said. The door to the boardroom opened. 4 people entered. Dark suits, federal badges. "FBI," the lead agent announced. "Nobody leaves this room." 2 more agents. "Health and Human Services OIG." Sterling backed away from the table. "You can't just burst in here without—" "We have a warrant," the FBI agent said, "for all financial records, communications, and documentation related to procurement and billing operations." He looked at Elena. "Agent Martinez?" Elena nodded. "He's all yours." Sterling's eyes went wild. He looked at the board members. "Don't say anything. Call our lawyers. This is harassment. This is—" "Mr. Sterling," the FBI agent said, "you need to stop talking." "I know my rights. You can't—" "We're not arresting you. Yet," the agent smiled, thin, professional. "But we will be seizing all devices, computers, and files in your office, and we'll need you to remain available for questioning." Sterling stood frozen. His phone, his laptop, his files. Everything that made him powerful, all of it about to be taken. Elena picked up her badge, clipped it to her belt where the intern badge used to be. The investigation is ongoing, she told the board. Federal prosecutors will determine final charges. In the meantime, this hospital is now under regulatory review. All financial operations will be audited. All contracts will be examined. And anyone who knowingly participated in fraudulent activities will be held accountable. She looked directly at Sterling. You said the law is flexible if you know the right people. Her voice was ice. I am the right people. Sterling said nothing. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. Elena connected her tablet to the boardroom display. I'll walk you through this systematically, she said, so everyone understands exactly what's been happening. Sterling stood against the wall, frozen. 2 federal agents flanked him. The screen lit up. First, the kickback scheme. Elena pulled up a document. This is a consulting agreement between Cardiotech Medical Supplies and Sterling Healthcare Consulting, LLC, a shell company registered in Delaware, owned by Richard Sterling. She clicked to the next slide. Bank statements. Cardiotech pays this company $50,000 quarterly. In exchange, Oakwood Hospital awards Cardiotech exclusive contracts at prices 22% above market rate. She highlighted the numbers. Over 3 years, this arrangement generated $847,000 in illegal kickbacks. A board member leaned forward. That can't be right. We approve all vendor contracts. You approved falsified pricing analyses. Elena displayed another document. These comparative pricing reports were fabricated by the suppliers at Sterling's request. I have recordings of those conversations. She played audio. Sterling's voice filled the room. I need you to provide documentation that these prices are industry standard. We can fabricate comparative pricing analyses. The board members' faces went pale. Elena continued. Second, Medicare fraud through upcoding. She pulled up billing records. Oakwood consistently billed for higher-level procedures than were actually performed. Example, a routine consultation coded as a comprehensive examination. The difference? $150 per visit, multiplied across thousands of patients. She showed a spreadsheet, color-coded, red everywhere. Estimated fraudulent Medicare billing over 5 years, $3.2 million. Jesus Christ, someone whispered. Sterling finally spoke. That's standard practice. Every hospital optimizes their coding. Optimization isn't fraud, Elena cut him off. But deliberately misrepresenting the level of service provided is. And you didn't just approve it, you mandated it. She played another recording. If you're not upcoding at least 30% of visits, you're leaving money on the table. I don't care what the documentation says. Bill higher. Sterling's voice, crystal clear. One board member stood up. Richard, tell me this isn't real. Sterling said nothing. Elena pulled up emails. Third, EMTALA violations. Federal law requires emergency treatment regardless of insurance status. She displayed message after message, Sterling's name on every one. Transfer all uninsured emergencies to county. We're not a charity. If they can't pay, they don't stay. Discharge within 24 hours regardless of medical stability. How many? A board member asked quietly. 17 documented cases over 2 years. 3 resulted in patient deaths. Elena's voice stayed even, professional, but something hard lived behind it. Those patients died because Richard Sterling valued profit over human life. The room went silent. Elena clicked to the final slide, a list of charges. Federal prosecutors are reviewing evidence for the following: conspiracy to defraud the United States, violations of the anti-kickback statute, False Claims Act violations, healthcare fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and negligent homicide. She let that sink in. Combined maximum sentence, 45 years federal prison. Sterling's legs buckled. He caught himself on a chair. A board member looked at the FBI agent. "What happens to the hospital?" "That depends," the agent said, "on how much the board knew and how cooperative everyone is moving forward." Every board member looked at Sterling. He just destroyed all of them. The FBI agent's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, nodded to his partner. "Mr. Sterling," he said, "we need you to come with us." Sterling looked up. His face was gray. "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet, but the U.S. Attorney has issued a warrant for your devices and requested your presence for formal questioning." "I want my lawyer." "You're entitled to one. You can call from our office." Sterling didn't move. The agent stepped forward. "Sir, let's not make this difficult." For a moment, Sterling looked like he might run. His eyes darted to the door, to the windows, anywhere but at the people staring at him. Then his shoulders sagged. "Fine. No shouting, no scene, just quiet surrender." The agent gestured toward the door. "After you." Sterling walked, each step smaller than the last. The man who'd strode through this hospital like he owned it, because he did, now shuffled like a stranger in his own building. They reached the elevator, the same elevator Sterling took every morning to his penthouse office. Staff members lined the hallway. Word had spread fast. Everyone watching. No one said anything. Sterling stared straight ahead, refused to meet anyone's eyes. The elevator doors opened. Elena stood near the back of the crowd, silent, observing. Sterling saw her. Their eyes met for 1 second. He opened his mouth, closed it. Nothing to say. The doors closed. Downstairs, the lobby was worse. Patients in wheelchairs, visitors waiting for appointments, nurses on break, all of them watching as Richard Sterling walked across the polished marble floors flanked by federal agents, the floors he used to own. Outside, 3 black SUVs waited. News vans were already pulling up. Someone had tipped off the media. A reporter shouted questions. "Mr. Sterling, are you being charged?" Sterling kept his head down. "Is it defrauded Medicare for millions? Did patients die because of your decisions?" The agent opened the SUV door. "Get in." Sterling climbed inside. The door slammed shut. Through the tinted window, he could see Oakwood Private Hospital, glass and steel and money. His kingdom, built on fraud, on cruelty, on the belief that power meant immunity. The SUV pulled away. Inside the boardroom, Elena was packing her files. Dr. Hayes appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted, relieved, broken. "How long have you been working this case?" he asked. 18 months, 4 weeks undercover here. "And you never told anyone?" "Couldn't risk it." Elena closed her laptop. If Sterling suspected anything, he would have destroyed evidence, intimidated witnesses, made the whole case disappear. Hayes leaned against the doorframe. "That patient last week, the one we transferred, if you'd stopped it—" "I couldn't." Elena's voice was quiet. "Not without blowing my cover, not without losing everything. He died." "I know." She looked at Hayes. "And that's evidence, too. Evidence that will put Sterling away for a very long time." It didn't make it right, they both knew that. But it was justice. Slow, painful, inevitable. The kind that didn't shout, just closed in until there was nowhere left to run. The federal audit began the next morning. Teams of investigators descended on Oakwood. Department of Health and Human Services, FBI, IRS, Medicare Fraud Strike Force. They arrived with warrants, subpoenas, and boxes for evidence. Sterling's office was sealed, yellow tape across the door, everything inside photographed, cataloged, seized. His computer, his files, his burner phone hidden in the desk drawer, all of it evidence now. Elena coordinated with the lead prosecutor. Conference room converted into command center. Whiteboards covered in timelines. Evidence boxes stacked floor to ceiling. "We're expanding the investigation," the prosecutor said. 6 other hospitals in the region use similar supplier contracts. Same shell companies, same kickback structure. How many people involved? Elena asked. We're estimating 12 to 15 hospital administrators, maybe 30 suppliers. This isn't just Sterling, it's a network. The investigation went public that afternoon. News headlines: Federal agents raid private hospital. CEO accused of Medicare fraud. Patients died while hospital profited. Sterling's face on every channel. Staff members started talking. Dr. Hayes gave a formal statement, named 5 other doctors who'd been pressured to upcode procedures, provided emails, documentation. Nurses came forward, told stories about unsafe staffing levels, patients discharged too early, families begging for one more day of care and being refused. The billing department coordinator broke first, walked into the federal building without a lawyer, and handed over her entire file system. He told us it was legal, she said, voice shaking. He said every hospital does it. We trusted him. More staff followed. Finance department, procurement, even Sterling's executive assistant. Everyone who'd been afraid to speak while he had power suddenly found their voice. Sterling sat in his lawyer's office, watching his empire crumble on television. They're offering deals to anyone who cooperates, his lawyer said. Your own staff is testifying against you. They're lying. Richard, they have recordings, emails with your name on them, bank statements. This isn't about loyalty anymore. It's about survival. Theirs, not yours. Sterling's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Board members, investors, friends who weren't friends anymore. He didn't answer any of them. His wife had already filed for separation, moved out of their house with their daughter, statement through her lawyer. I had no knowledge of my husband's activities. Saving herself. The suppliers started flipping too. Cardiotech's CFO took a plea deal, full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges, named Sterling as the architect of the entire scheme. MedSupply Corp's CEO followed, then 3 others. One by one, everyone who'd helped Sterling build his corrupt empire threw him under the bus to save themselves. Within 72 hours, Sterling went from untouchable CEO to completely isolated. No allies, no leverage, no way out. His lawyer laid out the options. Take a plea, cooperate with prosecutors, maybe get 20 years instead of 40. Sterling stared at the wall. I built that hospital. I made it profitable. I did what needed to be done. And now you're going to prison for it. The reality finally hit. This wasn't a negotiation, wasn't a business deal he could charm his way through. This was the federal government with unlimited resources and a mountain of evidence. And he'd given them everything they needed. The indictment came down 3 weeks later. United States of America v. Richard Allen Sterling. Elena sat in the prosecutor's office as they reviewed the charges. 18 counts, each one backed by evidence that had taken months to compile. Count 1 through 7, violations of the anti-kickback statute, the prosecutor read. Each count represents a separate kickback arrangement with a different supplier. Federal law prohibits offering or receiving anything of value in exchange for referrals or purchases involving federal healthcare programs. She looked up. Medicare and Medicaid are federal programs. Every kickback Sterling accepted violated federal law. Each violation carries up to 5 years in prison and $25,000 in fines. Elena made notes. What about the Medicare fraud? Counts 8 through 12, False Claims Act violations. Sterling knowingly submitted false claims to Medicare through upcoding and billing for services not rendered. Each false claim is a separate violation. The False Claims Act allows for treble damages, 3 times the amount defrauded, plus penalties of up to $11,000 per false claim. The prosecutor pulled up a spreadsheet. We've identified 847 fraudulent claims, totaling $3.2 million. Triple damages put the financial penalty at $9.6 million, plus per-claim penalties. He'll never pay that, Elena said. He'll try, Asset forfeiture will cover some of it. The rest he'll owe for the rest of his life. Criminal charges? Counts 13 and 14, healthcare fraud. Knowingly executing a scheme to defraud a healthcare benefit program. Each count carries up to 10 years. The prosecutor continued. Count 15, wire fraud. Sterling used interstate communications, emails, phone calls to execute his fraud scheme. 20 years maximum. Count 16, money laundering. He funneled kickbacks through shell companies to conceal their illegal origin. Another 20 years. Elena thought about the patient who died. What about the EMTALA violations? Counts 17 and 18. Criminal EMTALA violations causing serious bodily injury and death. These are rare prosecutions, but when a hospital administrator knowingly causes patient harm through emergency care denial, federal prosecutors can pursue criminal charges. Up to 5 years per count. She closed the file. Combined maximum sentence? If convicted on all counts and sentenced consecutively, 95 years. Elena's expression didn't change. Realistically, Sterling has no prior record. He'll cooperate to reduce sentencing. Realistically, federal sentencing guidelines for this type of fraud, considering the amount involved and the harm caused, put him at 15 to 25 years. With good behavior, maybe 12 to 18 served. He'll be 70 when he gets out. If he gets out. The prosecutor leaned back. Federal prison doesn't have early parole like state systems. You serve at least 85% of your sentence. And at his age, with the stress, 12 years might as well be a life sentence. Elena thought about Sterling walking through the hospital, calling patients units, laughing about how the law was flexible. When's the arraignment? Monday. He'll plead not guilty, but we have him cold. This goes to trial, he loses. He takes a plea, he still loses. The only question is, how long? Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just math. Cold, precise, inescapable. The federal seizure orders hit Sterling's accounts at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Every bank account, frozen. His primary checking, savings, investment portfolios, retirement funds, even his daughter's college fund that he'd set up in his own name for tax purposes. All of it locked pending the criminal case outcome. The U.S. Marshals arrived at his house at 8 a.m. Sterling answered the door in a bathrobe, unshaven. He hadn't slept in days. Richard Sterling? The marshal held up paperwork. We have a seizure warrant for this property under federal asset forfeiture laws. You can't take my house. The house was purchased with proceeds from illegal activity. That makes it subject to civil forfeiture. The marshal handed him the documents. You have 2 hours to remove personal belongings, clothing, photos, items with sentimental value only. Everything else stays. Sterling's hands shook as he took the papers. Where am I supposed to go? That's not our concern, sir. They seized the house. 6,000 square feet, pool, home theater, wine cellar stocked with bottles worth more than most people's cars. All of it gone. They took his Porsche, his wife's Mercedes that was registered in his name, the vacation condo in Aspen, the boat he'd bought 2 years ago and used twice. Every asset purchased with money he'd stolen. His lawyer tried to fight it. Civil forfeiture requires proving the assets were obtained through criminal activity. We have bank statements showing the shell company payments, the federal prosecutor said. We can trace every dollar from kickbacks to purchases. His house down payment? Paid 3 weeks after a $200,000 kickback deposit. The Porsche? Purchased with a wire transfer from Sterling Healthcare Consulting, LLC. It's all connected. The lawyer had no response. Sterling moved into a 1-bedroom apartment, the kind of place he would have sneered at 6 months ago. Cheap carpet, thin walls, parking lot filled with 10-year-old cars. His phone never stopped ringing, but not with opportunities anymore. Creditors, people he owed money, investors wanting answers. His name was toxic now. The medical board opened an ethics investigation. He wasn't a doctor, but he'd served on healthcare committees. Those positions vanished overnight. LinkedIn messages poured in. Former colleagues and business contacts removing their endorsements, deleting their connections to him. His social circle evaporated. Country club membership revoked. Friends stopped returning calls. Someone leaked his mugshot online. It went viral. Comments under every article. Hope he rots. My mother died because of people like him. This is what happens when you play God. His daughter changed her last name. Legal filing. Public record. She didn't want to be associated with him anymore. Sterling sat alone in his apartment. No furniture except what he'd bought at a thrift store. No car, no savings. Legal bills piling up faster than he could count. Everything he'd built over 30 years destroyed in 30 days. The empire he'd constructed on other people's suffering collapsed the moment the truth came out. He'd told Elena the law was flexible if you knew the right people. Turns out the law wasn't flexible at all. It was absolute, and it had caught up to him. Oakwood Private Hospital didn't close. The board brought in new leadership, former Surgeon General, reputation for ethics and patient care over profit margins. Her first act, fire everyone who'd knowingly participated in Sterling's schemes. Her second, hold an all-staff meeting. This hospital failed its mission, she said. No sugarcoating, no corporate speak. We put money before patients. We turned away people who needed help. We allowed a culture of cruelty to flourish. That ends today. New policies rolled out within a week. All supplier contracts renegotiated. Market rate pricing only. No kickbacks, no consultancy fees. Everything transparent and audited quarterly. Staffing levels increased. 1 nurse per 6 patients, not 12, not 15. Actual safe ratios. The billing department got overhauled completely. Third-party auditors brought in to review every claim. Accuracy over optimization. And EMTALA compliance became non-negotiable. If a patient arrives in medical crisis, we treat them, the new CEO announced. I don't care about their insurance. I don't care about their ability to pay. We're a hospital. That's what we do. Dr. Hayes stood in the surgical suite for the first time in weeks. He'd spent so long buried in paperwork, dealing with Sterling's cost-cutting mandates, that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to actually practice medicine. His patient, 52-year-old woman, triple bypass, complex case. No one asked about her insurance before scheduling surgery. No one pressured him to discharge her early. He operated for 6 hours, did it right, took his time. She survived, recovered in the ICU for 4 days, then transferred to a regular room. Physical therapy, cardiac rehab, full standard of care. When she was finally discharged 2 weeks later, Hayes walked her to the exit himself. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I didn't think anyone would help me,